Like there's a really large amount of people that think that way. That like if you are not on red team or blue team, whichever one I'm on, it must be because you're evil and you need to be socially excised from the equation. It makes no. It's not really a logical thing. It's not a particularly rational thing, but it is a deeply human thing. We intuitively want to belong to a team. We intuitively want to root for a team, and we want to fight other teams.
Welcome back to Drop the Mask. I'm your host, Jason. I'm here today with an incredibly talented guest. He's the author of a handful of books, the host of several podcasts, including The Political Orphanage, which is very good, and he's a stand-up comedian, and I'm taking his word for it that he was called very funny by the great William Shatner. You can find all about him at mightyheaton.com. There's enough material there to keep you busy for a long time, a lot more than I can say in this brief introduction. Andrew Heaton, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic to have you here. I'm very excited to talk to you directly. Anything else you'd like to highlight before we get into it?
No, everybody that listens to your show should buy my book, Tribalism is Dumb, which I think is what we will discuss. If you buy the book, we're going to talk about it in depth, but I'm just going to make a promise right now. If you buy the book, it will make you 3 to 4 inches taller. You will probably lose 3 to 5 pounds, but you put on 3 to 5 pounds of muscle mass. And most importantly, you will find politics less infuriating, baffling, and confusing for the rest of your life. By at least a little bit. I can promise one of those things will happen. And if by the end of today's episode you fall in love with my dulcet baritone voice, go check out The Political Orphanage, which I do every week on wherever you steal your podcasts.
Absolutely. I can't vouch for any of those promises, but you can hold Andrew here legally liable for that.
Yep.
I did first hear of you through The Political Orphanage, so yes, I would recommend anyone go check that out. But the thing I do want to highlight today, as you mentioned, is your new book, Tribalism is Dumb, where it came from, how it got so bad, and what to do about it. I picked it up a few weeks ago. I was hooked immediately, and it made me want to go find all your other work and binge on Heaton content. It's funny, smart, exactly the kind of thing that I like to talk about on this show. So, can you give us the quick pitch for it? What is it, and why did you want to write this book?
Yeah, I wanted to write the book because I thought everybody went crazy back in 2017. By the way, Jason, can I swear? What's the level of
you can say
swearing?
Anything you like. Yes.
Okay, I thought a lot of people went batshit in 2017, and I'm by the way, I don't mean like because Trump was good or anything like that. I just mean like I felt like people became extreme partisan to a new level in 2017, yes. And it freaked me out. My show, The Political Orphanage, is so called because I'm not on a team. I have lots of Republican friends. I have lots of Democrat friends. I have lots of Libertarian friends. I think that is how the world should work. You should be able to get along with people that you don't necessarily agree with. And I thought people went nuts. That was the main instigating factor. And in a nutshell, my thing is this. As a comedian, I have known for years that death and sex relate to the overall population. Like even when you're talking to monks may have experienced a sexual impulse at some point in their lives. They do on some level fear death. That's why you find in stand-up comedy a lot of jokes revolve around aging, fear of mortality, dating, marriage. Like we all on some level relate to reproduction and fear of death. The thing that surprised me was that just as strong as those very, very innate human impulses, just as strong is a incredible urge to support our team, whatever that is, and not just support our team, but to proactively go looking for other teams to fuck up. That seems to be an inbuilt evolutionary feature in human beings. It's not just that we want to like have sex and not die. It's very important to us that we be a part of a tribe, that we are esteemed highly in that tribe, and that we safeguard and promote that tribe. And actually, we go looking for other tribes to take their stuff away from them. And these are things that have been bred into us over countless millennia, and they manifest politically. And I don't think that we can inoculate ourselves to it any more than we can just talk ourselves out of not wanting to die or talk ourselves out of not being horny. These are fool's errands. You can't talk yourself out of being hungry. But you can be aware of how this affects you, how this affects others, how it affects all of us. And through that, you can make better decisions in your own life, but also be aware of why other people are doing their own thing. And so my hope is that in the same way that we've figured out that food is good, you need to eat, but maybe you shouldn't do it during surgery, or that sex is fine, we need that to have fun and cardiovascular exercise, most importantly, keep the species going, but you shouldn't have sex while flying a plane. That tribalism, likewise, ought to be something that manifests in healthy ways, like the Super Bowl that just happened, and something that we try to minimize in terms of government and politics. We try to be aware of our own mental shortcomings and design systems that don't inflame those problems.
Yeah, exactly. I heard you talking about this on the Tom Woods show a few months ago, and you mentioned the sports analogy. You said that is one of the healthy ways that we can express this tribalism. Um, so that sports fandom is just like a low consequence way for you to get that energy out, right? And for almost everyone, it doesn't matter if the Chiefs or the Eagles won the Super Bowl this last weekend, really. But the fans certainly act like it. But then I think it becomes a problem when we have the same type of fandom when it comes to politics. Why is that?
Yeah, it becomes a problem for a couple of reasons. I think the vast majority of people that watch the Super Bowl, whether they were elated or bummed out, understand pretty well that it would be inappropriate to try and ruin the lives of people that enjoy the other team. Understand pretty well that if you're an Eagles fan or you're a Chiefs fan, it's probably not a huge moral failing on your part, and are capable of working with, dating, sharing the country with people that are rooting for another team. The problem is when it gets into politics, you're speaking on an ANCAP show, you're dealing with compulsion. Government is a monopoly on force, and it's a big, powerful weapon that you're pointing at people. Now, I'm not an anarchist. I want there to be a government. I want it to be very small. I want it to be competent and functional. But at the same time, I will acknowledge that any government you have is making people do things, and that you don't want to have a government function as a big gun that we swap back and forth every 4 years. And it's not going to work very well if instead of viewing it in a healthy way, which would be theoretically, Jason and I are both members of Congress, and I'm part of the Whig Party, and Jason is part of the National Federation of ANCAP Party or whatever, that like we can argue and we can fight. That's good. People need to be passionate about politics. They need to argue about it. I'm going to have blind spots. He's going to have blind spots. But there's a difference between Jason and I are enemies versus opponents. That's very different. In the same way, to quote Thomas Sowell or to paraphrase Thomas Sowell, it's very different to think somebody's in error versus they are in sin. So with sports, I think that's a healthy form of competition. I think it's emblematic of my overlying thesis. Like if aliens came down and they didn't have that, it would be very weird. If they didn't have, like, they would be like, so wait, you like millions of people watched this TV show last night and you don't know anybody playing on the team? No, not personally. Really? So everybody sat at home and ate Doritos to watch a bunch of strangers. Like, why? And you're like, well, me personally, I'm from Oklahoma, and Missouri's contiguous to the state of Oklahoma, so I guess I'm kind of rooting for Missouri because we're sort of allies with them. I don't fit. It makes no. It's not really a logical thing. It's not a particularly rational thing, but it is a deeply human thing. We intuitively want to belong to a team. We intuitively want to root for a team, and we want to fight other teams. I mentioned in my book at the very beginning, kind of a light bulb moment I had was I had moved to D.C. for the first time. My dad was visiting me, and there's a event they do during the summer at the Armory where you can watch the Navy Army bands. I think it's the Navy band, maybe both. I don't know. You can watch them do brass band stuff. They'll play big band music, John Philip Sousa, that kind of thing. And at one point, they split into two different bands temporarily. One goes north, one goes south. And just instinctively, without even having to be instructed, when our side would start playing on the south side, we'd all clap. And then when the north side started playing, they'd all clap. And it's like, that is so intuitive to human beings to be like, oh, cool, we formed a team. We're going to root for our team now. Yay, South band that we got 8 seconds ago because we happened to come into the stand. Like, it's completely random. But no one's going, well, this is weird. why are we rooting for this particular band? That I could have been that band just to see. But we don't think that way as human beings. But again, that's fine. That's a healthy surface level competition. Competition can be very, 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 very pro-social, very productive, and lots of other. You want to have competitive corporations that are trying to beat each other at delivering goods. You want to have candidates that are vying for your vote in politics. But all of that's different than I have a like clan network of like bloodkin that I have to defend with my life, and you are a Hatfield and I am a McCoy. The ideas don't matter. It's just that I'm on red team, you're on blue team, fuck you, you need to die, or vice versa. That's not a smart way of doing it. And I think that as we get more and more alienated and isolated in society, as people pull out of Elks Lodge, Freemasons, swing dancing, church, whatever, the last man standing is politics. And so all of that tribal competitive energy that we've got that could otherwise be put productively or at least benignly into sports or whatever, it gets funneled into politics, which is the worst repository for it and is part of why our country's so shitty in terms of politics right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. In this phase of human civilization, we're not living in tribes in the way that I think most people would think when they hear that word, like a Native American tribe sitting around a campfire, sharing stories, passing around the peace pipe. But it seems that as we get more combined, more of a global society, these kind of tribes are forcing their way out into the open politically. Do you agree with that, or does that make sense?
I don't. When you say these types of tribes are forcing their way out, what do you mean by that? I don't follow.
I would say political tribes, Team Red versus Team Blue. So instead of like, well, I'm in Arizona. Instead of saying, those California people are so bad, it's like Republican versus Democrat, or anarchist versus socialist. Whatever.
Well, I think the parties, or really red team, blue teams, even a better way of doing it, have become tribes. They are the new tribes. I think that the period we're living in right now is kind of similar to like maybe the 40s in terms of how people viewed like race or religion. Neither of which I'm a fan of, by the way. Like, I don't want to go back to the period where like you wouldn't let your daughter marry a black guy. That's fucked up. But like now, you look at the polling. Like, you go back to 1950, like half the country or more thought miscegenation was immoral and that there should be laws about it. That like white people, black people shouldn't be allowed to do. Screwed up. I'm so happy we've quit doing that. And then you look at it, and like the same number today is like, oh no, that's fucked up. But I wouldn't let my son marry a Republican. Like there's a really large amount of people that think that way. That like, if you are not on red team or blue team, whichever one I'm on, it must be because you're evil and you need to be socially excised from the equation. I think that's true. Or like maybe in a more benign way, I grew up on the tail end of like when religion was a really defining feature of marriages. Of like, there were people like, listen, you can't. Darren's a great boy. You can't. He's a Catholic. We're a Methodist family. You can't. It just would never work. We're too different. Whereas like now, like I don't think anybody would really like maybe a little bit, but I don't feel like I know very many Catholics and Methodists that couldn't figure something out. But that's gone. Politics have become the new religions. They've become the new mega tribes, and it's sad too, Jason, because the research that I've seen, at least by I think it's Jason Streeter over at AEI, is that people that report being lonely are 8 times more likely to be politically active than the average person. So I think politics is becoming this kind of catch-all for people that don't have a healthy tribe, like healthy group membership, healthy group identity. They're defaulting on politics, and they're turning that into this really stupid partisan grudge match, cosmic battle between good and evil type thing. And really, politics ought to be extremely boring and quotidian. It ought to be a bunch of nerds arguing about like how to more productively get the parking lot done. Like that should be, it shouldn't be like the soul of the nation fighting darkness all the time.
Yeah, agreed. I wish I didn't have to care about politics, but unfortunately it's something that's kind of forced upon me and everyone daily at this point. Are there ways to avoid it, or is it just that we're stuck with the politicians kind of manipulating this tribal instinct to say, have us hate a common enemy, and that could be the other team, or it could be another tribe, another country, or whatever. Is it all just manipulation? Is it something we can at least work with if we can't get rid of it?
Yeah, I think there's two different ways to handle that, and we could kind of go stoic for a minute and say what can you do versus what can we do nationally. The national stuff is much harder to do. Nationally, if we want to try to redesign the system, I don't think the quality of politicians is significantly different than it's ever been. I think politicians tend to be a combination of, there's some combination of true blue activist, ideologue, narcissist, sociopath, ambitious opportunist. There's some milieu of people that fit into that mix. I don't think that's probably changed very much over the last 100 years. I think the sorts of people that want to go into office are probably similar, maybe a little bit different in that it's become so toxic that regular non-lizard people just don't want to run for office anymore because it would be like, why on earth would you want to? So maybe it's become a little bit worse, and that's had a narrowing effect on the type of people that go into it. In terms of things that we could do to alleviate things on a societal level, I think probably electoral reform's the biggest thing we could do. In that things like ranked choice voting, open primaries are going to stop both. They'll stop ideologically gerrymandering the country. Right now, the way we've set up our system is one where we have artificially conservative Republicans and artificially progressive Democrats that we all have to pick between. So the country's sort of constantly being asked to choose between Ramsay Bolton or King Joffrey. And that doesn't fit a lot of libertarians that don't feel like they're part of that spectrum, but it also doesn't fit a significantly larger amount of moderates that are like, the fuck why am I having to pick between these two shitty options all the time?
Yeah.
Electoral reform would help. Unfortunately, I think the biggest culprit in all of this, though, is not electoral reform. I do a fair amount of analysis in the book looking at other countries, and like, there are other countries that have other electoral mechanisms, and this seems to be something that's happening throughout the developed world. It's happening in Europe. I'm more familiar with that, but it's not something that's unique to the United States, which tells me that it's something that's bigger than the United States and bigger than our own individual quirks. So my theory is that it's probably mostly technological, that in the same way that when Martin Luther did his 95 Theses, he didn't, I'm not even trying to slam Lutherans here. He didn't have new ideas. There have been theologians that had promulgated the stuff Luther had said, just that previously Catholic Church could find him and set him on fire, so it could snuff out whenever there was that kind of thing. What changed was the printing press. That when Luther came around, and there'd been several people like John Wycliffe that had very similar ideas, when Luther came around, he could promulgate ideas faster than the Catholic Church could snuff it out. And as a result, it lit the Protestant Reformation on fire. And while I'm very, very glad that the gatekeepers died, I'm very, very glad that literacy, there's all sorts of phenomenal things that came out of it. I think it was a net positive. One of the side effects that did suck was that Europe had 300 years of horrible, horrible religious sectarian violence, where they no longer had one monopoly controlling all theology. They had multiple groups, and they figured it out through sword point. Now, we're not that bad, but we are going through something similar, I think, where technology has just altered the method of communication. And that's probably going to be something we just kind of learn to do as a society, I think, kind of slowly in a just, I don't know, like in the same way that some people will not bring their phone out at dinner, but everybody did when they first got their phones. I think little things like that are going to happen. People are going to realize maybe I shouldn't argue about politics on Facebook because it just doesn't seem to work very well. Maybe I should do it in person. So I think that society is going to adapt rather slowly, but I don't know that there's anything we can do on that front. I don't think that there's a silver bullet where we pass a law or something and just everybody's nicer on Facebook. I don't know how you would accomplish that, and I think trying to would probably significantly make it worse. In terms of what we could do as individuals, because you raise a very good point, Jason, that there is a lot of manipulation. Politicians know either through study or intuitively that it benefits them for us to be intensely tribal. When everybody's happy and they're not bothered, politics is this kind of boring thing that former student council presidents get into. It's not something people are super interested in, of like, what are like tariffs? Like, I care about tariffs, but I'm a dork. Most people don't really need to be thinking about tariffs all the time. And while I think tariffs are important, it's not the kind of thing most people, when things are going well, are really going to get animated on to the point where they donate money to your political campaign and they knock on doors and they treat you like a kind of nascent messiah here to deliver us from the darkness. Partisanship can make that happen, though. Tribalism can make that happen when it ceases being good idea, bad idea, vote for me, these are my ideas, vote for Jason, those are his ideas. That's kind of boring. When it turns into Jason is the embodiment of all evil, and his team hates you, and they want your children to die, and everything you stand for and everything that you believe is sacred is under attack. And I start to play with those deeply ingrained human tribal instincts of defend the tribe, defend the tribe, defend the tribe. If I can start doing that, then you go into war mode and you support my candidacy, and also you're a lot easier to manipulate. So yeah, I do think politicians are manipulating us. I think it goes back a long time. I think like pre-politician authoritarian strongman figured out a millennia ago that if you go to war, your popularity goes up and people fall into line and do what you want. War is the lifeblood of the state, all that kind of thing. So on our end, what we can do is just not be manipulated. And that's largely why I wrote the book, is I want people to understand what's happening. Again, you can't inoculate yourself to this. You can't think your way out of it. We're all human. We all have motivated reasoning. We all have these tribal impulses. But in the same way that, like, I can be aware that I have a libido, and maybe that will affect how I interact with people, that if somebody's hitting on me and they're trying to sell me a car, my dumb brain might make me more susceptible to buying that car because she's got cleavage or something like that. If I think about it and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to take a breather on this. I'm going to go get lunch and then think about whether I'm going to buy that car or not. That we can do the same thing with politics. We can do the same thing with politicians and go, you know what? My neighbors are mostly good people. In fact, most of the people that live in the United States are very decent, generous human beings. We're blessed to live in a country that is predominantly full of good people. And there are some shitbags out there, I'm not denying that, but I'm going to say most people that live on your street that have a Trump sign or a Kamala Harris sign are probably decent human beings. And we're arguing about how to get to a country that we would all want to live in. We're mostly arguing about how do we get to a place that is safe and prosperous where we all get to pursue the American dream. Like, very few people really, truly just want, like, poverty to exist writ large or want to abandon freedom of speech. Like, we're arguing about methodology to arrive at mostly good stuff, and that's fine. And being aware of that your neighbors aren't your enemy, being aware that there are like cognitive tricks that we're all subject to. In-group, out-group psychology operates where my team, whatever team that is always going to appear to me to be much more polyglot, less stable, more fractious, just full of vibrant personalities. It's amazing that we can even get our group together when you think about it. But the other team, the enemy team, oh man, they are monolithic and myrmidons. They lock arm in arm, and we're getting our shit together where they're doing drills and they're going to come over the hill and kill. That's what everybody thinks. Right now, the Democrats think the Republicans are this, like, monolithic cult. And meanwhile, the Republicans think that the Democrats all think the same way, and that they're like, it's fascinating to me when I talk to people. They always think you're raising these good points, but the other team, they're like an anthill. They're like they're all, and it's when you talk to them, that's not how people ever view their in-group. But it's helpful to know that this is just an effect of being a human being. We understand that which is closer to us than that which is on the horizon. We understand our own group dynamics better than we understand the out-group dynamics. Therefore, we assume that the out-group is going to be more vicious, cruel, and cunning than our group. Turns out they're also incompetent fucks. Like, these are things that I want to teach people so that they're not manipulated by politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. You go to some lengths to avoid identifying with the tribe politically, at least it looks that way to me. For example, the political orphanage, the title itself suggests that you're without a tribe. And then in the description, you call yourself an avowed independent. So is that something that you were conscious of at the time when you started this? And what's been the value of doing that?
Yeah, I was very aware of that when I started it. I probably shouldn't have called the political orphanage because it's actually not that political. Like, I really don't do that much partisan stuff on it, and I only do policy maybe once a month. A lot of the stuff is unrelated. Like as we're recording this, Jason, this week's going to be on the economics of sex, which is kind of political, but not really. Like, we don't get into Democrat, Republican stuff. But I did want to communicate, look, this is not a grudge match show. A lot of media that operates in the same space has a very predictable format, which is look at the bad team. They're even worse than I already thought. Look how horrible the bad team is. They're stupid. God, they're morally depraved. And it's a series of anecdotes designed to confirm to you that your team is good and the other team is bad. I find that deeply lazy and toxic to the American character, and I will not spend my life and my livelihood promoting that. I would rather be someone that infuses intelligence and kindness into the general discourse. So I wanted to use that political orphanage to term that. It would be better for me career-wise if I were an extreme partisan, for sure. Like, I would be making more money if I called it Drinking Liberal Tears with Andrew Heaton, or alternately, there's something privileged about Andrew Heaton, or Fight the Fascists with that, something like that. I would be easier for me to get a crowd, because it's a lot easier to send up a signal flare to get listeners and viewers if you have a really strong, confident message that's embedded in a yay my team, boo their team. It would probably be good for me to just to say I'm libertarian, but I won't do that. I haven't called myself libertarian in about a decade now. I lean that way. I definitely have libertarian bearings. I would say I'm a classical liberal, but I also don't want to back myself into a corner. I want to give myself the intellectual freedom of mobility to make decisions based on what I think is right and what I think is intelligent, rather than just backing up whatever the orthodoxy is of libertarians. So I want the ability to disagree with them. This is slightly frustrating for me, Jason, because everybody believes I'm a super libertarian when I leave Reason office because I make videos for them. But when I'm hanging out with like literal billionaires that go, well, you're a libertarian, I'll go, hold on now, I'm an independent. So I will go out of my way to tell people that I'm an independent when it in no way helps me career-wise. But I do think it's important for me to do that in order to be an honest broker. And I think it's also important to me because it, to some extent, allows me to be a little bit more independent and objective in my analysis, rather than just trying to swing for whatever my team is. And I don't want to do that. Even though I lean libertarian very hard, I don't want to just reflexively do whatever the team is doing.
Agreed. Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started, and I mentioned I use anarcho-capitalist, although I don't like the label for exactly that reason. Once you have joined that team, as much as you can call that a team of anarchists, it really affects your judgment. It's, you're like, I'm conforming now to that team instead of I'm trying to find the truth. So, yeah, I respect that a lot.
And you, like everybody else, is like me, is subject to motivated reasoning. Which is a very fancy way of saying that we make an emotional decision first, and then we rationalize it on a secondary basis. Human beings are not rational. We are rationalizing. And as human beings that are deeply concerned with our position within our tribe, we're not a social species. We're a hyper-social species. We are incredibly social. So much of our brain is dedicated to, does everybody like me? What are my mating options? Do I fit into the tribe? Am I moving up or down a status? So much of our brain is dedicated to that all the time. When you join any group of people, if it becomes socially significant to you, whether it's the ANCAP movement or Mormons or whatever the thing is, well, now your brain would much, much rather you be in good standing with your tribe than you be correct. Your brain doesn't give a fuck if you're correct or not. Like your instincts, your evolutionary instincts, they don't care if the world is flat or round. What they care is that your community likes you and that you are not exiled and you get to mate. And so your brain, my brain, everybody's brain goes into overdrive whenever what we think is coming down the pike starts to have friction with our predominant group. And there's really no way to avoid it, but I do try to be cognizant of it.
Yeah, you do have some good tips.
All that being said, though, Jason, when I said earlier about in-group, out-group shit, about how like your group always seems like it's barely coherent ragtag, and the other group, that I think is actually true with ANCAPs and libertarians. I think they are barely able to hold things together. Yeah, and I think the Democrats and Republicans would actually agree with that. Where they like, I went to all three conventions this year, and they were like, yeah, like the libertarians really are barely keeping the thing together.
Yes, so I would also, put myself in that vaguely libertarian camp. And you talk about how political persuasions tend to interpret information. You say that libertarians rely on a coercive versus voluntary heuristic. What kind of things do we miss with that lens?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Arnold Kling. He's an economist over at Mercatus, and he wrote a book called The Three Languages of Politics. And I think it's fascinating in one part because it just kind of gets into accents are in general. Accents are a feature, not a bug. Accents are not a random mutation that happens. There's a reason people from Scotland sound Scottish and people from Texas sound Texan. It's not random. What happens is, for most of our evolutionary history, it made more sense to rapidly be able to understand if somebody was an outsider than it did to be able to communicate with them. If some rando comes over the hill with a stick, it was better for you to immediately understand that he's an outsider and he might kill you or try to take your shit than it was like today, where it's beneficial to be able to communicate and do trade. And so as a result, our languages are constantly separating and mutating. Teenagers do this all the time. That's why teenagers come up with weird terms that we find baffling. Like I'm never going to describe something awesome as sick. That's stupid. But then again, I describe stuff that's awesome as cool, which probably sounds nuts to anybody born in 1920. But that's all happening, and that happens politically as well. It's not just linguistically, it's politically. And Kling talks about how there are three languages of politics in the American experience, that progressives tend to understand things and communicate things and focus on things that fall into a dichotomy of oppressor versus victim. Conservatives tend to understand, explain, focus on civilization versus threat to civilization, whether that is barbarians at the gate, immigrants, terrorists, communists, whatever, that are going to infiltrate our country or attack our country, or somehow come in and impugn our country, or whether it's within it's entropy, it's moral lethargy. Like the sub-headline to every Fox story ever could be civilization under attack. That's how conservatives tend to think. Libertarians tend to think in terms of coercion versus voluntary. So did somebody make you do it? Then who gives a fuck? That's kind of the libertarian way of thinking about things. I am partial to that way of thinking about things, but Kling would say, and I agree, that the name of the game is not that one of these heuristics is the unified string theory, that we should all spend our time arguing that, you should take this heuristic over the others. That really what we want to be able to do is identify what does this particular situation call for more than anything else. That, like, most people will oscillate between these, and that's very healthy. So like when Trump came in 2016, using Kling's definitions, the Democrats became very conservative and still are with Donald Trump. Like there's a lot of big guy versus little guy, but a significant amount of the language that surrounds Donald Trump is this man is a threat to our very delicate democracy, which is an extremely conservative way of thinking about things. And if we were to go back further, we were to look at like the civil rights movement, like the progressive heuristics are a pretty good way of understanding that. There was a group of people that were historically oppressed by a powerful group, and that is a good way of understanding it. Then I'd say most stuff in politics can very well be explained by the libertarian heuristic, but like right out the gate, one that like makes immediate sense to me is like marijuana. Like I could kind of get to marijuana legalization through the progressive heuristic by going, well, we disproportionately prosecute black people, so it's racist, so we shouldn't do it. It's just quicker to go, look, if it's your body, smoke pot, who gives a fuck? Like, is it your garage? I don't care what you do in your garage as long as you don't hurt anybody.
Is it hurting anyone? No.
Yeah. So I think that the libertarian one, I mean, that's the one that I use the most. In terms of stuff we miss that are heavy on the libertarian heuristic, there are certain stories from a media perspective that just don't compute. So do you recall maybe 10 years ago now, there was some guy in the United flight that was overbooked, and he's like an Asian doctor, and they came on and they're like, hey, you got to get off the plane. And he was like, no, I'm not getting off the plane. And they're like, well, we're kicking you off the plane. And he's like, no, I have patience. Like, I can't, I bought this ticket. I've made a contract with you. I'm not getting off the plane. And so United just beat the fuck out of the guy. Like, just beat the shit out of him, like on camera.
Yes.
That one was harder for libertarian. Like, everybody was right to be outraged by that. United fucked up. United deserved to get egg on their face for that. He deserved monetary retribution for it. Like the public was correct in that outrage. Libertarians had a much harder time being able to plug into that, because the libertarian heuristic was like, well, like, I mean, it was a private contract, and like I guess kind of the police got involved, but it was a corporation that was fighting a guy, and like, so they could kind of get there, but it was harder because they had to figure out a way to how did this become voluntary or involved? Like, they had to add an extra step to get there. I I think the other thing too that libertarians really struggle with is libertarians are much more they are much more prone to systemic thinking and much less cognizant of group psychology than the average person. And so I think that while libertarians are often right about political economy, they are extremely dismissive or blind to just the kind of gooey human trappings that we're all a part of anyway. In the same way that, like, if an alien came down and they're like, why is everybody watching the Super Bowl? I'd be like, it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. They're throwing a dead pig around a field. Nobody knows them. It doesn't affect anything. But like the average human would be like, no, this is important. If you don't get this, you don't get me. Libertarians have a hard time, a lot of the time, connecting with people on that irrational human level that defines everything.
Yes, agreed. That was David Dow, by the way, the passenger on the United flight.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
if anybody wants to look it up. Uh, so yeah, definitely we need to understand the emotional side of things, the group psychology. That's something like I said, I've been trying to do. Although even when you start to understand it, as you said, you're not immune to these trappings. You're still going to fall into the same tribalistic things, the same salesman techniques that people use to try to get people to do what they want, right?
Can I offer some pointers to your audience? I'm assuming that they are ANCAP heavy or libertarian heavy on things that might
Sure.
be well suited for them specifically.
Yeah.
You're not going to argue anybody into your political philosophy because people aren't rational. People are far more likely to join a thing because they have social pressure to join it or a social reward for it. Like, I don't think that people are in the 2000s, people weren't flocking to the Democratic Party in mass because it produced a white paper on logic. It was because the Daily Show was really cool and people wanted to hang out at the cool kids table and like the celebrity, like it was stuff like that, right? I think libertarians oftentimes nail the logic and don't get the emotional side. And one of the things that, and I'm projecting a lot of myself onto this. It is difficult for me to let go of incorrect statements. I'm having a conversation with somebody and they say something which I know to be factually incorrect, or I know that it is logically incoherent. And it's really difficult for me to just let that go. I feel this like almost like genetic compulsion to set the record straight, and it does not help. It very rarely helps at all.
I'll tell you, it doesn't even help when you're married to the person.
Yeah, I wouldn't think. It's much more helpful to be able to make the person feel respected and make them feel heard. And so, like, I would advise libertarians before they, again, I'm guilty of all of this, before libertarians go on their tirade about why coercive force is tyranny or whatever the thing is that they're wanting to communicate. Like, I would ask the following question to somebody: when was your political awakening? Like, Jason, for you, when was your political awakening? Like, when did you get interested in politics?
The main one was the COVID tyranny, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And like, my guess is that partly because of the way you phrase that, COVID tyranny, that like you are now very concerned about like arbitrary use of power. You're concerned about like people that have authority on others misusing it, abusing it, like stuff like that. In the same way, like if we were talking to a really progressive person, like a Bernie bro person, and it's like, how did you get into, like, what was your political awakening? And they're like, like I walked by a homeless camp and I started crying. It was really, I thought it was so terrible. And I was like, we got to stop corporations. Like, one, like, I think your sentiment is exactly correct. Like, in this country, nobody should be stepping over prone figures in America. It's deeply fucked up. I don't want that at all. I'm completely with you on that. I applaud your impulse there, but like now I can kind of connect with them. And go, I actually think my situation, what I'm trying to push here, I think would be better for homeless people. But I'm with you. Like, our goal is very, very similar here. And then the other bit too is like, by the way, I'm open to being wrong about this. I'm curious what you want to do to fix the homeless situation. And you'll find that when people feel that they are being, they're having a dialogue and they're being heard and they're being respected, that they're so much more open to whatever you have to say than if you're just arguing with them. And a lot of libertarians kind of right out the gate are like, well, Ayn Rand, and then they'll go off on their monologue, and it like you can watch people tune out. That's not helpful.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct about that. Definitely getting into what people actually care about is very valuable. Have you had any success trying to convince people of things either through your podcast? I know you're not directly saying this is why this works, but what techniques do you find effective in your own life, your own personal friendships or anything, if you're trying to at least get people to see where you're coming from?
Yeah, I think I have been successful in that regard. I don't know that the book has been. The book is mostly. I think the book has had a self-selecting audience of people that are not terribly tribal and partisan, but are deeply bothered by it. And so it's been soothing for people that read the book because they go like, this thing's been really bothering me. Now I've read Tribalism is Dumb and I get why this is happening. So at least it's not baffling to me anymore. At least I've got like an intellectual scaffolding to understand why people are such assholes in politics. So I don't know that the book has made the country any better, but I think it's made the qualitative experience of people that read it better. It's been palatable for them. In terms of the political orphanage, which is my day job, yeah, I do think that's been successful. I've had lots of people write into me over the years that have said like that the show has altered how they view things, where they used to think that one political party was just like this evil force of darkness, and that they've come around to like, actually, this is a very complex system, and most of the people that are participating in it are decent human beings. In terms of stuff in my life that makes a difference, that I do in my personal life, one is I have given up on trying to convert anybody to whatever I am. Andrew Heaton, libertarian-leaning independent. I don't care if you become me or not. In fact, I'm not interested in that. What I am interested in, and I think I'm good at, is making you a smarter version of whatever you already are. If you are a progressive Democrat, like that's awesome. I don't like it's so unlikely that you're going to like go read Milton Friedman or whatever and become modern Whig Andrew Heaton, that it's not even worth pursuing. But what I can do is go, look, I can help you drop the dumb shit you think and think a smarter version of what you currently think. I'm not going to make you not a Democrat, but I can make you a smarter Democrat because I'm going to see stuff that you've not seen. In the same way, you can make me a smarter version of whatever I am because there's clearly blind spots that I've got, and I want you to tell me about that. I find that to be helpful, where I'm trying to give people tools, but I'm not trying to convert them. The other thing, there are things that I do in my life that I've kind of learned by trial and error, and I've read about. When I'm interacting with people, I try to say something to the effect of, "I can tell it's very important to you to help people." I tend to argue more with progressive Democrats because most of the arguments I get into are about economy. If we were talking about social stuff, I'd probably argue with Republicans more, but it just doesn't come up as much. So I'll say, I can tell it's important to you to help people. I don't lie about it. I don't want to manipulate anybody. What I want to do is rapidly communicate to you the conversation that we're having is not a proxy war for whether or not I think you're a shitbag. The fact that we're arguing about tax rates, I've already decided you're a good person. Great news. Regardless of the outcome of this conversation we're about to have, you seem like a nice person that really cares about other people. So like, you're good. So this conversation that we're now having is different than you, and you don't need to feel attacked by it. We're going to have this chat, but it's separate. I find that to be useful. One of the other things that I find useful is trying to teach yourself to, rather than say that's wrong or I disagree or whatever, say that's interesting and ask a follow-up question. Somebody has like a really different take where they're like, I don't know. I think we should, instead of having capitalism, why can't people do interpretive dance? And we'll allocate resources that way. I'm like, well, that's interesting. How did you get there? How would it work? And like, now I actually am kind of interested. Like, how did you fucking come up with interpretive? Like, this is like 3 steps past Elizabeth Warren. Where did you get that from? And then like, okay, well, like, walk me through. What would it look like? At that point, like, one, it might be a more interesting conversation anyway, because again, it's so rare to be able to convince somebody to. It's very rare to argue someone into submission. It's extremely rare, in large part because the way most people argue is, Jason, you're wrong, you stupid fuck. And now I'm now arguing with you, and in order for you to agree with me, you have to acknowledge that you're a stupid fuck. And guess what? Most people don't want to do that, so they're just not going to agree with you. So it's very rare to argue anybody into submission anyway. But what you can do, I think, is have a good conversation with them, maybe plant some seeds. maybe knock out some stuff that's dumb that they can get rid of. So like, I don't think there should be a minimum wage. I think price controls are stupid. I don't think price controls work. I kind of look at economics like physics, and if you want, like, I'm sure that this is all gospel that you're familiar with, Jason, and your listeners are familiar with, but minimum wage, you're not actually giving somebody a minimum wage. What you're doing is you're outlawing any labor that costs less than the minimum wage. You're just outlawing labor, and you're going to decrease, or you're going to alter the supply and demand, and you're going to increase unemployment at some level. And
Right.
we can. Some people are going to be benefited from it. Some people are going to lose their jobs. I'm more concerned about people losing their jobs. Therefore, I'm against it. I'm really unlikely to ever convince a Democrat to abandon minimum wage. That's just extremely unlikely. The social cost would be so high for them. It's almost a sacred belief. But what I can do is go. Well, you know what? What I would rather do is I'd rather be like Northern Europe, where they do it sector by sector, and they don't have the government do it. They have unions and the Chamber of Commerce basically do it. Where like the grocery union will negotiate a minimum wage with the Grocers Association, which is better because maybe the profit rate is different for grocery stores than it is for software. By the way, it's massively different in the United States. Or like, again, I bring up Europe as much as I can. If you're looking at Europe. Europe doesn't have there's no national minimum wage in Europe. That'd be crazy. It'd be nuts to have a minimum wage that's the same in Portugal as it is in Berlin. They're a very different economy. You put everybody in Portugal out of business. You'd cripple a whole economy. Well, in the same way, the economic latitude between the wealthiest county in America and the poorest county in America, there's more difference between those two counties than there is between the Brazilian economy and the British economy. And so you start kind of getting people to think, and then I'm like, you know what New York did a few years ago is they went, we're going to have a minimum wage, New York State, but we're going to make it different based on whether you're in New York City or you're in New York State. There's going to be two different speeds for that. And we're going to alter it based on the size of your company. Now, I wouldn't have done it at all, but if we're going to do it, I'd rather be like that. And maybe I can kind of push people that direction where at least like rather than making it a big blunt instrument that's going to put millions of people out of work, we can fine tune it a bit. And so I think that's the kind of thing that having a good political conversation, you're more apt to have a productive end with.
Yeah, one of the things in there, just to hit it again, putting the conversation into a different region in itself seems to be a good tactic. Like we can talk about separating states and doing things here, or even cities within states. But if you talk about it as something abstract, like what should they do in Uganda? People can separate themselves from that conversation and start to have a more reasonable mindset around the actual policy versus, oh no, you're not going to take away my health care or my minimum wage or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Another thing you talk about is Bayesian reasoning. I've been seeing this everywhere, so I feel like I have to bring it up. What is Bayesian reasoning? How does it help avoiding these arguments?
Bayesian reasoning is a great mental tool that I wish I'd learned 20 years ago. But as it is, I only learned it about 5 years ago. So like, so how about this? Jason, do you believe in ghosts?
No.
Okay. That's normally how we think of beliefs. I don't believe in ghosts, right? Bayesian reasoning would be like this. I 80%, this is true. I 80% don't believe in ghosts. I 20% kind of believe in ghosts. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is very largely, I don't think they're real, but there is this little niggling bit in my mind of like some credible sources that I know personally that have seen a ghost. And so, yeah, I don't think there are ghosts. If I had to bet on it, I'd say no. And I'd be very certain about it, but I'm not 100% certain. Like there are things I'm 100% certain on. The sun will rise in the east tomorrow. That is about as certain as I'm 99% certain about that. But like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like with the recent tariff thing with Mexico and Canada. I'm very anti-tariff. I'm very pro-free trade. Trump seemed to use it as a negotiation tactic. So like, should Trump use that as a negotiation tactic? I'd say like 70%. No, he shouldn't. But like, there's a little bit of Bayesian reasoning. You're communicating how confident you are in something. And I think the benefit to that is twofold. If you and I are going to have an argument, like you're in favor of there being zero gun laws at all anywhere in America. And I'm like, well, how strongly do you feel on that? What is your confidence in that? And you're like 99%. There should never be any gun law ever under any circumstance, including prisons. People in prisons should be allowed to have guns. I'd be like, okay, interesting. I now know that this is not going to be a good debate. Like, I shouldn't argue. If you're 99% confident on this, I'm not going to even have a chance to argue with you. So let's just talk about how you got there. Like, help me understand how you got there a little bit better. But it kind of works the other way too, where like if we're arguing about something or discussing something, and I'm like, yeah, I 70% believe it, I 30% don't believe it. Like maybe the Kennedy assassination is an example of this, right? Where like I maybe 60% think the lone gunman thing's right. Like this, the more I read about it, I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of red flags there. So I still think Lee Harvey Oswald did it, but there's a lot of latitude there. So if you're a Kennedy assassination conspiracist, like I just got a lot of credibility because rather than me saying, I think you're a conspiracy nutbag, I went, I do believe overall the Church Commission, like I do, but man, I have a lot of pause about it. Like I've indicated to you that I'm being at least something of an honest broker, and I'm approaching this somewhat objectively, and I'm open to your position, and I don't think you're an idiot. And now we can we can both kind of adjust our expectations on where this conversation is going to go. We can both go in with a reasonable inference to how open to other ideas you are. And if you're not, then maybe I'm not going to try to expose you to new ideas. Maybe I'm just going to talk to you about how you got there.
Excellent, man. Well, we're running low on time here, but thank you so much for joining me. Where can people go to find you? Where's the best place?
The best place to find me is my podcast, The Political Orphanage. Come listen to that, listeners. And if you are one of these people that I've described who's like, the fuck happened? Why'd everybody get mean and weird? Why did my church collapse? Like half the people went Episcopalian because they were like, what? Why? If that's you and you're kind of baffled by how politics got so awful, read my book, The Political Orphanage. But the promise that I can make to you is by the time you finish the book, you will feel a little bit less mystified at how shitty American politics is. You'll understand why it got there, and that in and of itself will give you a little bit more of a sense of control, and it'll make it feel less personal to you, which means next time you get into an argument with your uncle at Thanksgiving or your niece that just went to Vassar, it will be less infuriating to you, and you'll be able to wade out of it. So check out The Political Orphanage by Tribalism is Dumb by me, Andrew Heaton.
Yes, and it completely undermines my reason for existing on this podcast, so this might just do it for me. We'll see. But thanks again, Andrew. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And thanks for watching Drop the Mask. See you next time.